Hey there, adventurers, I'm Pruitt. This is Jim Davis. Obviously, by the title of this episode, you know it's about mega dungeons. You've looked at the time bar, and it's a mega episode. So let's get to a... fuck it. God damn it. All right, Jim.
Yeah.
We talked about dungeons.
We did talk about dungeons last week.
And it was, you know, it was a quaint little episode. Let's get mega with it.
This is mega dungeon, like all
Mega.
caps with 5 umlauts.
With 5 umlauts and 10 exclamation points.
Mega.
What makes a mega dungeon?
As opposed to just a big ass dungeon.
It's supposed to just, you know, you could have a 4-layer dungeon. That's
Sure.
just a dungeon.
Sure, you could. A 4-layer dungeon's good. The mega dungeon is the centerpiece of a campaign.
Whole thing.
So I think like the mega dungeon is the tent pole that holds up the campaign.
Right.
It is the default for what are we going to do this week? We are going into the dungeon. A dungeon that you're going to spend the entire campaign in. And while you might leave the dungeon, and most mega dungeons feature some sort of home base that's on the surface, then you travel to it.
Yeah.
Classic mega dungeon, there's sort of a hex map that surrounds it, that you go exploring in, and then you get to the location.
Well, because there could be multiple, you could have to go a mile over here just to get down into a crack because a tunnel's blocked off. So that's how you get to the next part of the dungeon.
In terms of visual reference, I think like the Dark Souls, the expansiveness of the city that you're exploring in and the environments around it, not just like the deadliness of the monsters of it, but just exploring this environment, unlocking different connections between areas is a good way to kind of think about a mega dungeon. Obviously, Castle Greyhawk is sort of the prototypical never published Gygax. Never publishing things. There are some of them that were done for Troll Lord games, Castle Zagig. Castle Greyhawk's sort of like the gold standard that was never released. We're never going to get to see that. But there's others. Undermountain in Waterdeep, sort of that's in Forgotten Realms, the sort of city. There's the Yawning Portal. Really a mega dungeon. They're like 15 to 20 levels, if not more. Hundreds of rooms. There usually is some kind of overarching, plot is not the right word, but sort of theme to the dungeon itself that kind of gives it a coherence. Whether it's the different levels of the dungeon are sort of at war and in competition with one another, or a single malignant or malign entity sort of holds sway over the dungeon.
Could you do a funhouse mega dungeon?
I mean, you could.
Would there be any kind of continuity to keep a player's interest? Or just the randomness of it? Eventually either A, lead to a TPK because you stumble into a room in your like 6th level and you stumble into the ancient red dragon room.
Right.
Or your players just get like overwhelmed by the absurdity of it.
I think that could happen. In my experience, mega dungeons do very well if there is if there's a coherence to them that a funhouse dungeon doesn't have.
Right.
So in the 2 mega dungeons that I've run, including one that I designed from scratch by myself, I tried to have some sort of consistency with what was going on, the factions in the dungeon. Part of the appeal of mega dungeon play is that as the players explore this environment, then they create maps and they take their notes, that they start to understand something about it.
Yeah.
And they start to be able to predict things. And they maybe look at a map after they've been in a particular level, say 5 or 6 times, they made that many delves, and they get their map together and they're sort of connecting areas. Then they could go, you know what, there's a huge blank space here on the map. I bet there's something there we haven't found yet.
Right.
And being able to look at the environment for that, and they can go, okay, well, there's stairs that connect here to the 3rd level, and there's the shaft that goes down to level 8, and stairs up to the, this level. And so you can start to kind of piece together this environment. And in some ways, this is the ultimate test of a DM because you're having to come up with a lot of content. Yeah. Most of it's not going to get used.
Well, that's
right.
true.
It's just not.
As always, no content survives contact with the players.
Absolutely not.
It never makes contact with the players.
Because it never actually makes it. And you should save what you have. The appeal of the mega dungeon is that it's like you are exploring this environment and you're using your skills as a player, not necessarily as a character, but as a player to move about this environment, find what you want. You're going to want to go in with specific goals in mind. You can't just wander aimlessly around a mega dungeon. I mean, you can, but that's not the most
for a short
satisfying
time.
way. Yeah, maybe your first couple of delves, you're just like, let's see how far in we can get.
But by then you should have picked up on a few clues as to the players in the dungeon, or at least in this area. clues about like things deeper in the dungeon, references to either puzzles or whatever that are deeper in the dungeon?
Puzzles, factions, legendary treasure that can be found there, antagonists that you might want to fight. The early levels of a mega dungeon, so like your first level, your entrance level, you want there to be enough factions, at least 2, potentially 3, or even more. I would keep it under 6 personally, that you introduce fairly early on. That's
12,
a lot. 12
factions.
Factions per level.
A baker's dozen.
Just introduce them. This is where you get to start kind of telling the story of the dungeon through the actual play of it, not through information dumps for when the players go visit the sage or a big setting Bible for them to read before they start. It's like, how do you tell a story through a dungeon? Well, the first couple of levels, you describe the dwarven architecture of it, but the orcs who've inhabited this place have clearly modified it to their own ends. And there's orcish graffiti everywhere. And in the first 3 or 4 rooms you go in, there's clearly signs of a massive battle that took place some time ago. As there's the, bandit weapons and orcish bodies that are there. You're sort of entering in the dungeon in media res in that way. And you just like, by your descriptions of the rooms and the environments that they're in, you can start to build up a history to this dungeon that the players then start thinking like, okay, well, we passed out of the dwarven levels 2 levels ago, and we're clearly through the natural caves that connect this part of the mega dungeon with that part of the mega dungeon. So like, what's down here? Is this the source of everything that we've been looking for? And be able to make those connections and make those leaps of logic. And then the players will do a really great thing in that you don't have to prepare everything, and just listening to them speculate about what you've done or may not have done can then spark your imagination to go like, that's a really good idea. I've left this area fuzzy for a reason. We can go with this. And some DMs don't like that style. They think it should all be laid out in stone ahead of time, and others are even more extreme with the fuzziness of it. I like somewhere in the middle where I'm flexible enough that if a player idea is better than mine and I can find a way to work it in, then I will, and now they get to feel like they figured it out because they're putting 2 and 2 together and speculating, but their speculation then becomes like better than what I thought up.
In an environment like this where you have players going in, they'll go in, they do a thing, they come back out. They go in, they do a thing, they come back out. I mean, this is D&D. And unless you're playing D20 Modern, there aren't any refrigerators, right?
Correct.
So how does a DM keep it fresh, Jim Davis?
How do they keep it fresh? Well, first off, you're going to want to make sure that it's tightly sealed.
Hermetically sealed
Hermetically sealed mega dungeon. Let's say you are 5 sessions in, and the players have cleared out a bunch of levels of the first, or a bunch of rooms to the first level of the dungeon. They've allied with one faction, they've wiped out another, or at least sent it scattering. How are you going to, change the environment? The mega dungeon does need to be, the physical form of it needs to mostly be the same, although things can change. Walls can get knocked down, doors can get destroyed, new tunnels can be made, excavations. Those are the kinds of things that you might want to do. Maybe the dungeon is alive and reforms itself periodically. This is a fun surprise for the players, particularly if they have intricate maps that they're being overly reliant on. So restocking tables and a restocking procedure are going to be good. How often do you restock? Are your restocking tables, are they drawn from the wandering monster tables that you have? In which case you say, roll on a wandering monster table and see like, all right, well, this creature came up from below. They're going to find a empty space in the dungeon to make a new layer in. You've wiped out that faction of goblins that, that you've been working on for a few weeks, but they're still refugees. And so you might add to your wandering monster table more wandering goblins to represent the fact that these goblins don't have a home yet. They're just kind of wandering around. Those are the ways that you can change up the procedures of your dungeon to make it fresh. And so the players have cleared out the first level, and let's say they spent a couple of weeks back in town, boozing it up, carousing, doing some magical research, getting some
making
items,
an item or something.
Making an item or something. There's a side quest or 2 that they want to go on. They want to visit some family members. And it's like a month before they get back to the dungeon. They enter it confident, this place is safe and everything. And nope, guess what? Something else has moved in here in the meantime.
Killed the goblins, now orcs have moved in.
Now orcs have moved in. Those bandits who you met on the road have taken advantage of the power vacuum. The cultists that you ran out of town have escaped here and formed an alliance with the ogres. Like, that's kind of how you make it fresh. So restocking procedure is going to be good. You also want to restock treasure. In a historical sense for D&D, the Mega Dungeon, in Mega Dungeon style play, which is like original and basic D&D, you're getting as much or more XP for extracting treasure than you are for killing monsters and performing quests. And so restocking with treasure was an important part, but it also what drove you deeper into the dungeon. We've cleared out the first level.
Yeah.
We've turned over every stone. We've checked behind every secret compartment. And so we've got to go deeper in the dungeon. But you also want to restock with treasure, restock with magic items, restock with interesting NPCs, just to kind of keep it fresh. But you don't want to restock it so much that the players get stuck on one level.
Well, yeah, they just keep going back, clearing it out, getting treasure, leaving, coming back,
clearing
it
it
out,
out.
getting treasure, leaving.
Right.
And it's just kind of like, now it's just like the tides.
Yeah.
You're just coming in, back.
I mean,
in.
and if they're worried about that, then they should hire some people to stay in the dungeon for them and establish a beachhead that way.
Well, yeah.
So
establishing a forward outpost isn't a bad idea.
it's not a bad idea. So other ways that I would keep a dungeon, a mega dungeon fresh, with, other than restocking, are to vary the environments. Never having more than 2 levels be the same theme. So if the first couple of levels were the dwarven fortress of whatever, then the levels above that are the human settlement that was built on top of it, and the levels below it are the natural caverns, and then you're going to get into the drow city, and then there's the fungal garden, and then there's the gateway to hell, and then there's the underdark level, that kind of thing.
Right.
So each level can have its own theme.
Yeah.
And the really good mega dungeons will have a cross section. In fact, I kind of think you can't have a mega dungeon if you don't have a cross section of your dungeon that lists out. That's just me. I'm a purist that way.
Well, you want a map.
You want both a map that shows you sort of the layout of the dungeon, but then also one that gives you a greater sense of how big it is.
Yeah.
And so that's where you can sort of see the connections. Do you have a connection between level 1 and level 12? How many stairs up and down are there? Because just like we were thinking about a level of a dungeon, you want a lot of connectors between the rooms. You also want a lot of connectors vertically between the different levels. So varying up the environments, there's got to be a mushroom forest somewhere.
Yeah.
And there should be a gateway to the nether realms somewhere. I've built a mega dungeon that had an elevator with 2 monkeys in bellhop outfits that would allow you to travel to different times and places. Because it's just like, I just thought that'd be weird.
Oh, that was
like that one time you guys ended up in trenches of World War I.
That's what that was.
Yeah.
Oh my God! Yes. Holy shit! Now that was
that was Blackrock.
That was Blackrock. Okay, I'm remembering that now because, yeah, it was because they had the 2 dials that they messed with. We figured out at least like 3 of them.
Yeah.
But I do remember the one door would open up and it's just
like
fire.
Yeah.
Because there's a doorway to the plane of fire.
It's a plane of fire. Yeah. So
You're okay as long as you're in the elevator.
As long as you're in the elevator, step out.
But didn't we actually go out in that at one point? We got like some fire protection because we had to. I thought that was a case.
Quite possible.
It's been a long time.
Very long time.
But that was one of my favorite parts of that dungeon.
Yeah, the monkey elevator was a fun one, including I think I had one that was like to the Battle of the Somme in World War I, which I would let you guys bring back like rifles and grenades if you guys made it out, but it'd be very difficult.
Man, can you imagine? Can you imagine just like a dwarven fighter grenadier in D&D?
Yeah.
And he makes his way to World War I, opens a box of grenades.
And
that's all he does. He's like, forget everything else. Bring these 3 cases.
Bring these right here.
And he brings back, say there's 50 per case. He brings 150 grenades.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Back to D&D.
That'd be fun. Better hope. He doesn't know how to use them, so he's going to have to do some
Well, I mean, maybe during the trench before, he sees people pulling pins, throwing them, explosions.
Yep.
And then
there you go. So the third way I would keep it fresh is the outside world.
Yeah.
That the dungeon exists, but there needs to be an outside world around it. And so whether the outside world is, just as bunch of scattered villages, or there's a big city that you can go to, there's some base of operations, maybe it's a fort, maybe it's a castle that you own. That the outside world, getting to and from the dungeon, shouldn't be a total pain in the butt. And in running a mega dungeon, if the players are like, we want to explore the mega dungeon, there's nothing wrong with going, okay, you're at the entrance. And you just completely skip the week's worth of travel there.
Yeah.
Or maybe you play through that week's worth of travel.
Well, maybe you play it the first
day
time.
or two. First couple of times. Really, the mega dungeon is like the epitome of the environmental exploration pillar of play.
Yeah.
That the DM has made this elaborate, and they are oftentimes elaborate and never finished, by the way, dungeon that has all these different entrances and all these different ways of moving around in it and interacting with it. That just figuring that out, piecing it out, creating the maps, figuring out how things work, looking for the tricks and the puzzles.
I just, while we're talking about this, Jim, I had a bit of an epiphany.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be possible for there to be a living mega dungeon?
Oh yeah, and I think some of the best ones, the best mega dungeons do have kind of a malign intelligence to them. So I think, like, are you talking like it's a giant creature, or it's just this thing is more than just a subterranean environment?
It's more than just a subterranean environment. What I'm thinking of is, like, imagine a section, like a mountain, right, or a dormant volcano.
Right.
That has in it, like, the offspring of, like, a fire elemental and an earth elemental that was born on this world.
Yeah.
And the mountain itself is sentient. All of its tunnels, all of its passages, all of its caverns are actually like the internal workings of a living organism.
Yes.
So monsters have moved in, a dragon has moved in, and it's cluttering up its system.
Yeah.
So it calls out to adventurers to enter its caldera, its mouth, and basically be medicine. And to go through and cleanse out this thing from all of these obstructions, obstructing its paths and everything, because maybe it needs to be rid of all that so it can move on to the next whatever,
move on.
or shift back into the plane of Earth.
I think that's a great idea. But first off, it gives an overall theme to the whole dungeon. It gives a reason for the PCs to be there. Maybe they're psychically called or they feel compelled. Now they've got to investigate that phenomenon and eventually sort of figure this out. I think, and there are ways that you can sort of portray that mechanically.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of, like, the mega dungeon is like a haunted place.
Yeah.
Or in the way that I've seen it best described as a mythic underworld. It's more than just a subterranean environment. There's a mythic quality to it.
Yeah.
And so some things that you can do to kind of reinforce that are things like maybe the doors are never locked or stuck for the monsters. Ever. Unless the players, like, pile a bunch of garbage and barricade themselves behind one. But if they just, like, lock a door with a key or try to, like, wedge it shut with an iron spike or something, the monster's going to get through that door eventually.
The monster just opens it the other way.
It just opens it the other way, right? Monsters never set off traps.
Yeah.
Right, they always will bypass a trap, even if it's there. And so that's a good way to kind of mess with the players and really hammer home the fact that, like, this place is trying to get you.
Yeah.
And the inhabitants here enjoy a certain protection from it. Personally, if it were me, first level of the mega dungeon, your dark vision works fine. It's perfectly fine. You got light sources, whatever. Second level, no, you don't have any dark vision. First off, I find 5th edition is way too generous with dark vision. There are way too many parties that don't need to carry around a torch or a light spell. And so in a mega dungeon, if I were running one, it's just like, like the first level, you're still on Earth. And then by the second level, you've entered into a different place. And you can't see in the dark. Everyone else here can, and you have to light up torches in order to see anything. And I might even mess with the light level. Like, the deeper you go, eventually your torch just radiates.
Torch gives off 10 feet.
Right, 10 feet of bright light, 20 feet of dim light, and then that's it. There are certain things that you can do with that to reinforce the kind of oppressiveness of the mega dungeon. So other things are things like, do you allow a party to rest in the mega dungeon? We kind of covered that last week, and the principle applies. Maybe there are safe rooms.
That might be a priority. Once the players start to see that, they're like, all right, we need to try to find our next bonfire.
Right.
To go back to Dark Souls, but
yeah, exactly. Maybe this is a room that we used a shrine last time. Maybe there's a fountain. Maybe there's maybe you've aligned yourself with one of the factions, and part of the benefit is that you can sleep there if you want. Yeah. You got to be fine eating goblin stew.
But yeah, you spared that goblin warren. They had a hag or something that was messing with them. You took care of her.
Took care of her.
Now they're beholden to you.
Exactly.
They want you to trade with whatever you find deeper in the dungeon.
Exactly, and they're willing to pay top dollar for
Well, not maybe
whatever
not dollars,
weird.
but like
They'll give you chits.
shits or
Goblin teeth.
acorns. Or, I'll give you 3 bags of teeth for that sword, Sonny.
Maybe healing works differently in certain parts of the dungeon to reinforce the oppressive nature. And maybe healing's like you get minimum, or it's like, yeah, you roll a die, but it's -1 per die, or something, just to reinforce the fact that this is a malign entity or something. Or in the opposite direction, maybe you're like, in your example where the dungeon is calling to them, needs adventurers to come out, to come help out, then maybe the dungeon can do subtle things in their favor. And maybe those things work behind the scenes. Okay, you guys cleared out that really hideous troll from the first level that was messing with this dungeon and they didn't like it. So from now on, you guys don't trigger a wandering monster on a 1 in 6, it's more like a 1 in 8. And that's something that the dungeon has done to you, done for you.
Yeah, it's kind of deadened the sound in the dungeon, so your footsteps, your combat doesn't carry as far.
Right.
Even though it can't really affect the monsters, it can alter what passageways look like to make it seem like a dead end. So you can stay at the end of this hallway in a room, and it appears to be a dead end, so a monster wouldn't go down there.
Yeah, might not.
And all it is just the structure of the hallway, just kind of, oh, it looks like a dead end.
Yeah, I feel like this is a good time to briefly talk about a third level spell in 5th edition, Leomund's, I believe it's Tiny Hut, not Secure Shelter.
Yeah.
And what to do about that. Some DMs do not like this spell. They feel like it's a cheat, that it basically is a free rest in the dungeon. The spell's there, it's ritual, you can just set it up, and I think it is a valid use of the spell to rest in the dungeon. But depending on the circumstances of what's going on around that rest, the players might wake up surrounded by monsters, the players might wake up with their enemies having sort of scouted and determined their location. I mean, there's some weird interaction between who can see into the Leomund's tiny hut, who can see out, what the players can do, can they shoot out of it, can they throw things out of it. But at the same time, it's not a omnipotent thing.
Well,
there are ways that the enemies can react to the party resting in a tiny hut, that they don't just have to sit there and wait to get slaughtered by a fully rested party.
Yeah, I mean, what's stopping if you're in a tunnel or a passage or a cavern? I mean, what happens if the enemies drop the ceiling on that where they are resting with that Leomund's tiny hut?
Right, and so the 8 hours are over and then it collapses on top of them.
See them up there just chiseling away above you, and you have a decision to make. We have, guys, we got 2 hours left on this rest, and they're about to drop this ceiling
They're about to drop
on
the
us.
ceiling on it, yeah. I mention it just because I know somebody's going to mention in the comments, what about the tiny hut? That's how you rest in a dungeon. It's like, yeah, that's what the spell's for.
Yeah.
But it is not, there are options that the DM has. Reread the spell. It is not omnipotent.
We mentioned Blackrock earlier, and that was a fun campaign. It's been a while.
And not to confuse the issue, but I ran 2 mega dungeons fairly back to back.
Yeah, no, they were. That's why it's hard. I conflate them all the time.
It was like we played one at the tail end of 3rd edition, and then we played a brief 4th edition game, and then we played Labyrinth Lord, which was a retro clone of basic D&D.
Yeah.
And then to kick it all off, one of them was Castle White Rock, which is Dungeons Crawl Classics number 51, a huge box set. If you ever get your hands on it or see it, it's a great adventure. It is a campaign.
It's a whole thing.
You're gonna, yeah. And then the other one, which is Black Rock Mountain, which was inspired by my experiences playing WoW in Lower Black Rock Spire, Upper Black Rock Spire, and my take on that dungeon was obviously a boxed campaign that I modified and used, but also really, it was advantageous to use at the time because late 3rd edition was an incredibly difficult game to prep for.
Yeah.
And so we had some pretty memorable characters came out of that, and the dungeon itself is pretty memorable. There's a giant pyramid in the middle of a mountain that a wizard teleported there. There are drow that are in sort of inverted towers sort of hanging from the ceiling in these massive stalactites. A Dwergar city with a
big old fighting pit.
And eventually a ghost dragon over a lava lake. And even just the dwarven mines, the troglodytes. The reason why I always come back to it is because when I ask my players, like, what is one of your most memorable campaigns that you can remember? Castle White Rock, for some reason, keeps coming back. Almost everybody. And to me, it was a not particularly remarkable campaign. I had a lot of fun with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't like earth-shattering events happened all the time. We did have plenty of battles, and the ante was always being upped. When we got to the Dwergar city, I do remember us running a bit of a racket with the fighting ring, because I was playing Theron, my Storm Sorcerer.
Right.
Audie was playing Tomlin, her Rogue.
Ranger Rogue, yeah, with the adamantine daggers.
The adamantine daggers and just murder all over the place.
Yeah.
And then that's where Emma was playing Fabian as a paladin.
As a crusader.
As a crusader.
From,
Book of Nine Swords.
Book of Nine Swords,
and And so I think, pretty sure it was Fabian that was doing the fighting.
Probably, yes. I remember,
and we were running, and Tomlin was running the racket up there. And I think I did a wizard duel also.
There's probably a wizard duel there.
Pretty sure I did a wizard duel. Yeah. But I just remember Tomlin running the betting racket and us mopping up big time.
Right.
And I do know we had to get out of town.
Yes.
At one point because of that.
Because of that, yes.
But the other moment I remember just for my character, because that was the culmination finally of me realizing what spellcasting was in D&D.
It really was sort of your first full spellcaster that you were like, yes, this is how it's supposed to work.
Oh, I get it. So make Electro.
Right.
That's all he was. He was a superhero that dealt with lightning and flew around and did whatever and had all the maximizing and powers and had multiple rods to do that. And I had the energy immunity thing. I mean, and again, this was late third edition, so he was a character made from 6 different books, I think.
At least, man.
At least 6 different books. It was just 1 feat from here and 1 spell from there and that. But the big thing I remember was the dragon that we killed in 1.5 rounds. I went first, and then I think I went first, and then the dragon went, and then everybody else went. So I hit it, it did a thing, everybody else hit it.
And it was back to the
Second
top of the
round,
initiative.
I hit it and flew right into its face, because I had that basically the precursor to Hellish Rebuke. It hits me, I hit it with a big lightning thing, maximize, blow its head off.
Blow its head off, yeah.
And I took 20 damage.
Yeah.
And then hardly anybody got hurt. And we killed it should have been a thing, but I do remember you specifically going, fuck.
Yeah.
Well.
I don't remember that fight at all. That's just one of those things where, you remember what you remember. My memory has always been
I do remember it was that moment where you were disappointed because we killed your thing that you thought was going to be a big fight in a round and a half.
I do remember there was supposed to be a big fight over a lava lake, and it was one of these moments in 3rd edition where I realized, if I'm remembering correctly, that I was like, if this is a real ghost dragon and looking at what the players could do, I'd be like, this is not going to be a fair fight. So I think I probably removed the ghost quality from it and made it an actual dragon, which definitely would make it a lot more vulnerable at the time. But it's one of those things where that campaign was so massive and eventually became so expansive, and the whole campaign world grew out of just that dungeon, that mega dungeon. So the next campaign I ran was set in the same world and was sort of built off of events that happened towards the end. But we had players who were traveling all over continents with, doing other things, and all of that spun out of events that happened in the dungeon. And they would be like, "Oh, well, I found this magic item, or I found reference to this thing," and then they go and try to find out more about it, which requires them to leave the dungeon. But at the end of the day, what they're doing is they are heading back in there, and eventually you guys never left.
Right.
Once you guys got to the giant mushroom forest with the inverted drow towers and the pyramid that were there, you guys stayed in the dungeon.
Yeah.
Whereas before, you guys would leave, come back, and eventually you guys just stayed there. And so that was one dungeon, and then we ran a brief 4th edition, and then we went to Blackrock Mountain. And Blackrock Mountain, for those of you curious, takes place in the Wilder Lands of High Fantasy, which is a Judges Guild product. They was using the Necromancer Games remake. And so it was a giant hex map about the size of the Mediterranean. In which case I set Blackrock Mountain somewhere off of Rory Stone Road near Thunderhold, and just had you guys make up basic D&D characters. And I remember the first couple of sessions were a real meat grinder. I don't know that anybody's the character that they started with lasted that long, but you guys did eventually make characters that lasted up to 5th, 6th level,
which was a feat in and of itself.
Yeah, and
pardon
so
the self D&D referential pun.
It's a style of D&D play that's different. You've got to get used to it.
That original D&D, it isn't the same. I see a monster, let's run up, roll initiative, and fight it.
Yeah,
it's no. You have to start thinking like it's the art of war. What
Yes.
kind of terrain am I on?
Yes.
Am I on higher ground? What do our numbers look like?
Right.
Can we defeat this thing only by overwhelming odds, or is it an even match? If it's an even match, don't do it.
Don't do it. Why would you?
Why would you ever do a 50-50 with your life?
Yeah.
Right?
And yes, and so because you're fighting, particularly at the lower levels where you have single-digit hit points potentially for a while. Basic D&D at first level, everyone fights the same. A fighter is no better fighter than a wizard. Now later on, the gap between the way a magic user and a fighting man can fight becomes different, and there are some retro clones where the fighting man is the only one that gets better at fighting. But in Labyrinth Lord, your wizard can use their quarterstaff or their dagger just as well as the fighter's using the longsword, and that wizard only has a spell.
Right.
And so it really changes how you approach the game. Did you bring enough henchmen? Are you, henchmen are very important. I sometimes like to think of D&D in terms of just the total hit points of the party.
Yeah.
More henchmen equals more hit points in the party, means that damage is going to be spread out more. It's not going to be concentrated on a few characters. And yes, henchmen will die, player characters will die. If a player character dies, promote a henchman. Now they're a player character. That's just kind of how you have to play it. And we played, I think the highest level character got about 6th or 7th level, maybe one of the thieves. That was being played.
Yeah, well, I think Aegon, like my dwarven fighter, just straight dwarven fighter, Aegon II. I think he's 6th level. I looked at that character sheet today.
Yeah, and he had a couple of henchmen that he kept with him.
Mumford.
Mumford.
Oh God.
Oh, Mumford.
Mumford and Son, which was the dwarf's name. I made it totally so the party could hate my henchman, and I treated him like shit the entire time. And then he actually saved my life. I remember this. And I was like, oh my God. And then not even like an adventure or two later, fucking dies. And I was like, Aegon was torn.
It was torn.
But I mean, hey, he was a fun character. He didn't have great stats. He had a decent strength. He had like a 12 or 14 strength. But everything else was average to like 8 intelligence or something.
Yeah.
But he ended up with a lot of fun stuff. I remember I finished with like a sun sword, like a sun fang or something like that.
Yeah.
It was badass. I think I had +1 breastplate, but
Yeah.
it was like at the end though, he was kind of a badass. He was a hoss. He was a tank.
Right.
You know?
I mean, but
He did it all for Mumford.
He did it all for Mumford. So to me, this style of Dungeons and Dragons using original or basic D&D is like mainlining D&D heroin into your eyeball.
Yeah.
Like to me, it's that pure essence of what I think of as Dungeons and Dragons. And so some memorable moments from that campaign are the time where you guys found the secret entrance into the orc tunnels. Remember those orcs who'd set up all those wooden barricades inside the dwarf library?
Okay, yeah.
Party was maybe 12 PCs plus henchmen.
Yeah.
And there was maybe at least 8 or 9 orcs on the other side of this secret door, and you guys surprised each other. And it was a massive fight, and they started throwing flaming oil, and so everybody started throwing flaming oil, and you guys set their wooden barricades on fire.
Yeah.
And like 4 of y'all's henchmen died, and it was just this brutal battle in a tunnel, and there was no room for maneuver.
Nobody could get out.
No room for quarter, and it was as what you would expect. It was nasty.
It was a meat grinder and a lot of death, a lot of burning and a lot of bleeding.
Yeah, and so then you guys came back, and the orcs had cleared out of there. There was like 1 or 2 stragglers remaining.
I remember, if I'm remembering correctly, we had to RP upping our rates for our henchmen after that because we
Yes.
almost had a mutiny after that.
Yes, you guys almost had a mutiny after
Yeah.
that, so you had to start paying them more
Yeah.
and equipping them better.
Yeah.
But there were a ton of other things. You guys cleared out the bandits at one point that were on the surface, and then another bandit group came in and took over. You guys found the Tomb of the Builders and got caught in that sand trap and had to use your genie wish to get out of there. I think you guys, at one point, you guys found the dwarven catacombs that were haunted and saw a bunch of wraiths and were just like, fuck this.
Oh, no.
And they were just like left.
No. Aegon didn't want to go in there because these were dwarven catacombs. He was not going to have to slay his ancestors. Even though they're just wraiths and it's putting them to rest. But like just the thought of that. Having to battle against the...
And then it being basic, those wraiths are going to drain actual levels. There were a lot of things about that campaign that I loved. I wrote 8 levels of it and envisioned it at being 16 levels, but really only made about the first 3 or 4 levels of it. Quickly became clear from a DM's perspective that I could do way too much prep work on this. And with a mega dungeon, if you've got a general feel of the overall layout, you've got your cutaway, your how many levels there are, and you've got, let's say, the first 3 or 4 levels mapped out and keyed, and I'm talking like minimum descriptions here. 1 line at best. Most of the rooms in your mega dungeon should be empty. Like 75% of them should be empty. Debris or something in there to interact with. Maybe there's hidden treasure or a secret room. But these are places where you're just kind of wandering through as you get between, and that gives a sense of scale. It gives a sense of pace, and it doesn't make your mega dungeon too crowded. I love mega dungeons, and I love that style of play.
Yeah.
It is absolutely hands down my favorite D&D, and if you haven't tried it, it's a lot of work. Do your research. It's a lot of prep up front, but it can be a very rewarding experience.
Most definitely. As rewarding as filming this episode has been. Was that a toot?
My shoe farts. My right shoe makes a toot noise when I walk.
Oh, Converse?
Yeah.
Heel? Yep, I do it all the time.
Sweet.
I think I can do it. Jim's like, that's great.
Also, if you drag the toe, it makes the same noise. So if you need to cover a fart, I've actually done that before.